So welcome. My name is Adelaide Meadow, and you are here for a workshop on healing movement for the first 40 days. I'll take a minute here to introduce myself. I live in rural New England, and I work as a midwife here in my local community. I also run a well woman care practice where I see women for all sorts of different pelvic health and women's health healing or concerns in healing. I have been a physiologist and a body worker for over a decade, and I specialize in intentional movement for the female body. And what I'm sharing with you in this webinar is everything that I encourage my midwifery clients to really work with, as well as the women who come into my practice for those initial days and weeks following the birth of your baby. However, if you are here and your baby is much older than that, these will still absolutely be useful to you. And what I mean by that is just understanding the healing and the anatomy and physiology of the female body, and specifically of the female pelvis in the duration of the postpartum period, which is forever after you had your babies, as well as actions that can support you, is going to be useful no matter where you are in your healing trajectory. Likewise, if you haven't yet had a baby or you support other women in birth, tuck these away for future use because they're going to be supportive. So first, I would just like to speak a little bit about the unique anatomy and physiology of the female pelvis. So here is a handy pelvic model. This is a female pelvic model. And a few things to notice here is the open chalice-like shape of the female pelvis. So a male pelvis has a much more uprighted shape. It has this open chalice-like bowl for our babies to sit within. Also, our pubic bone is not fused in the front, meaning it has this ability to shift up and down or to move open and apart, as is unique. So we can birth our babies as well. Here in the back, we have our sacroiliac joints and our sacrum. And we won't do a full pelvic anatomy lesson here, but just the greatest hits. And these SI joints, which are often a cause of discomfort for women in general, but certainly in that postpartum period, really benefit from stability because they are innately mobile in nature, which allows us to have an easier time birthing our babies because our tailbone can kind of bow out of the way, so to speak, to open the pelvic outlet. Please don't mind these strings. We're going to talk about those a little later, but they're not an anatomical structure. So understanding the shape of the female pelvic bowl is really helpful when we're thinking about this initial healing in the postpartum period or long-term healing. As we know, or maybe we don't quite yet, but female pelvic anatomy, the bony structure, is resting in what is often called an anterior tilt. I resist from calling it that because it's only considered anterior when we use male bodies as the standard, which they're not. But for the sake of teaching and learning, this anterior language is helpful. So what it means by having this anterior tilt is it allows these bones down here, which are the inferior bones of our whole pubic symphysis region, it allows them to act as a shelf for our uterus and our bladder and our pelvic organs in general. So having our pelvis oriented in this capacity gives us a true floor. When we talk about the pelvic floor, we're usually referring to the musculature and connective tissue. And I want to add here that we can also be referring to bony structure, right? Specifically this bone, these inferior or bottom bones of the pubic symphysis. So having our pelvis oriented in this way is already going to be a supportive shift for the female body in general, and certainly in these initial healing days, weeks, and months and years of the postpartum period. So why I like to start with this is so often we are in this uprighted shape, or maybe even in this sort of tucked tailbone posteriorly tilted shape, especially if we're laying in bed a lot, which of course is what you should be doing in the immediate weeks following the birth of your baby. So we'll be looking at some ways to be supportive for our bony structure, even during that integral period of rest. So as we see this bony arrangement, I like to discuss not just the pelvic floor, which is usually thought of as all of the musculature and connective tissue that is in this sort of basket area between the coccyx or the tailbone, our two ischial tuberosities, and the pubis. So we have a weave of musculature in that region and connective tissue. But rather, can we think about the entirety of our inner pelvic bowl, right? So all of the contents inside the pelvis. So this includes not just the pelvic floor, but the organs as well, and the musculature that is lining these two bones of the ilium, So the musculature and tissue that's lining these two bones of the ilium, the anterior part of the sacrum, the rectum, all of this is the inner pelvic tissues, ranging from muscle tissue, organ tissue, lymphatic tissue. Our lymphatic cistern lives inside the pelvis. So there's a lot going on in here, right? So as we're thinking about this inner pelvic musculature, there is a section of the pelvic floor. It's called the levator hiatus. And while we won't get into all of the pelvic floor or all the inner pelvic anatomy in this webinar, the levator hiatus is a little structure that does warrant some specific attention. So if you imagine here, I'll see if I can hold it in this capacity. The levator hiatus is shaped like a horseshoe, shining right, and again, I'm going to move this out of the way, but know that that's not anatomically true, but it's shining right towards the pubic bone. So a little horseshoe shape that's opening towards the pubis. And this is referred to as the largest hernia portal in the body. And a hernia portal is an area where tissues have an ability to bulge through other tissues. And there's nothing wrong with this. We have hernia portals in the body for a variety of reasons. And usually it's due to changes that need to occur in the body. So there is advantageous for whatever reason for there to be less tissue support there. And a great example for this in the female pelvis with the levator hiatus is it needs to be able to open. That horseshoe needs to be able to open to allow our babies to pass through in childbirth. And what's unique about the levator hiatus is that it stays open. It stays in this, goes from a very small shape to a far more open shape for 6 months to a year after the birth of our babies. So this openness in the levator hiatus is often referred to as an underlying cause for prolapse. And I want to just knock that out of the park right now, because that would seem like a poor design. It's actually quite the opposite. Our levator hiatus is a key prevention, or is key to preventing long-term prolapse. And of course, prolapse is the descent of our pelvic structures through our pelvic bowl. So what's unique about this is the fact that this structure stays open rather than reclosing is actually allowing the full rebound up of all of our pelvic tissues back into a more supported state in our pelvic bowl. Versus if it closed, then there would be something that, a tissue or whatever that might be stuck down that have a hard time reintegrating, right? So this openness of our levator hiatus is actually super helpful and effective for our long-term pelvic health. Right? It's super effective for that overall structural integrity. So having this be open is super important to our postpartum healing period. And also what that means is there is less support. There's less support in that levator hiatus so that when we're adding pressure down into the pelvic floor, things can actually move down, which is the other kind of aspect of why this structure is often blamed for prolapse in that first year postpartum. So instead, let's really think about how we can be supportive and not increasing pressure down into the pelvic floor in those certainly in those initial 40 days, but then moving forward into the 6 and 12-month postpartum period, right? So all of what we're going to be looking at today is going to be very aware of this tender healing stage for this particular structure in the bottom of our pelvic bowl. But we will not be adding any pressure downward. This is also why I would resist from definitely from pathologizing prolapse, but certainly even from diagnosing, quote unquote, prolapse in those first few weeks and even months following birth, because everything is reintegrating, right? So if you're watching this and you're like, things don't feel quite the same in my pelvic floor and I gave birth 2 weeks ago, that's totally not just normal, but coming from an intelligent physiological underpinning. Things are open so that they can move back up and in, and everything we'll be looking at today will be in service of that reintegration. So let's just take a breath and talk about movement for the first 40 days. Holy smokes. I want to be really clear right now. Movement does not mean exercise. I do not want anyone to be exercising, in quotes, in their first 40 days postpartum. The deal with the first 40 days and maybe much of that 4th trimester is rest and healing and integration. I've been known to say that postpartum healing happens laying down. I really believe that, right? A restful time is essential, right? While also not putting significant weight on that levator hiatus and on our pelvic tissues in general in that initial postpartum period. So these actions that I'm going to discuss are exactly that. They're actions, there are movements that can be healing and supportive for that initial healing period. These are meant to be gentle, restful, and restorative. That being said, laying in bed for a month and a half, often makes our bodies hurt. And that makes sense because movement is truly healing at every stage of healing, even if that is just the movement of the breath, the sliding of the jaw, the reaching of the arms in different directions, taking wide diaphragmatic breaths. There's a variety of ways we can move within the body that will truly be supportive and helpful. And that's what we'll be looking at today. So I divide the movement that it will be healing in these initial first 40 days into and onward, right? But for sure in this tender period into 4 primary categories. And these categories, we'll go through them all together, and then we'll go back into each category and we'll look at a few different actions or movements in each category that are great to be practiced. And we'll be looking at a few ways to do all of them so that by the end of this webinar, you'll say, oh, I have these 4 categories. And then within that, I know some actions or movements to practice. So you can put together little nutritious movement sequences for yourself that you can pepper into your days while you're nursing your baby, while you're resting, while you're laying in bed, while you're, hopefully doing other restorative postpartum activities. Okay, so the 4 the 4 movement sort of categories that I work with or that I encourage are the activation of the channels of the legs and feet, the activation of the channels of the legs and feet, the soothing of the hips and low back, because God knows many of us can really utilize that postpartum, the connection between your respiratory diaphragm and your pelvic floor diaphragm, or all of the inner pelvic musculature, as well as strengthening and really activating the nursing body. So we're talking about the neck, the breast tissue, all of our lymph in our whole armpit region, as well as the jaw and the back of the neck and the skull, right? So working with what does it mean to be looking down at your baby? So just to go through those again, activation of the channels of the feet and legs, soothing the hips and low back, connection between the respiratory diaphragm and our pelvic floor tissues, as well as, I say strengthening, I use that term quite lightly, but activating is actually a better word for all of the musculature in the ribs, shoulders, neck, and upper back as we're nursing and feeding our babies. So let's go through those categories one at a time. And at different points during this, I'm going to move my orientation so I can be showing you and demonstrating what some of these actions can look like. So let's begin with activation of the channels of the legs and feet. Few thoughts here, right? Our legs and feet get super stagnant when we're laying around in bed, right? And that doesn't have to be the case. Think of our feet. We always start at the bottom, which is why we're going to work from the feet all the way up to the crown of the head. But keeping things moving and flowing in these roots of the body is stimulating a blood flow, lymphatic circulation, and really just energy up through the body. So I like to think of our feet and legs as channels. Imagine you had like a straw in the sole of your foot, and it was like all the way up and just sort of drawing from the earth up into the body. It's also noteworthy that the fascial lines from the arches of the feet come to fruition in the cervix. So anything that's going to be stimulating for our feet and our calves and our legs in general is going to be super integral for our postpartum healing period and for our overall longevity of our pelvic health as women. So we're going to start with some foot stimulation. So this is the first exercise in the category of stimulating the channels of the legs and feet. And we're going to go through 3 different exercises, and we'll look at a few ways to do those exercises. So the first one is foot stimulation. So I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this. So first one, this is just a dryer ball. What could also work is a tennis ball. Some people use like a lacrosse ball or something hard like that. I would keep it chill in general, and specifically in this early healing stage, just standing on a ball in the arch of the foot. I would start by working at the forefoot, meaning kind of right where the ball of the foot connects with the arch, and just rocking back and forth. My toes are spreading. Isn't too much to look at, but it can be quite sensation rich. And then moving towards the midfoot, angling towards the arch, inner arch and outer arch, and then towards the hind foot. I don't know if you can kind of see from the lateral view, bring towards the hind foot, so just in front of the heel. This is quite a smushy ball, so it feels, pretty mild, but still soothing. Right, so this would be one thing to do. Now, keep in mind, you can do this with less force in the bed. So one way that might look is say, you're sitting up because you're a few weeks postpartum, say maybe 3 or 4, where I'm in bed, I'm maybe propped up, my baby's beside me, right? And I can just be doing this. This is where a harder ball might be of use, right? Because you're putting less force on it.
But anything that's kind of rolling on the ball and stimulating will be really soothing and activating to the arches of the feet and to all of the fascia and connective tissue on the bottoms of the feet in general. And it just feels great. It's one way to be activating the soles of the feet. The next thought on this activating feet is going to be spreading the toes. So maybe you can see this, my toes are spreading, and it's kind of an awkward angle, right? But working to spread the toes, and if your toes don't spread, that's okay. We have to teach them. And so this is how we begin to do that. I would suggest getting some toe spreaders. You can even get the little foam ones at CVS or local drugstore, that ones that you would use for a pedicure or something. Or there are ones that are more structured, that are often wood or hard plastic, that really hold the toes apart. Or if you don't have anything like that, grab a sock, or here I just have like a yoga belt, and I simply will weave it in between my toes. Give me one moment to create this masterpiece here, right? Where I'm really opening up. Oh, it feels so good. Opening up. Let me scoot forward so you can see how I did this. Right, please don't mind this ridiculous angle, right? But hopefully you can see how I wove this all the way into my toes and allowed them to spread. And just that simple spreading, getting a muscle to activate, is going to begin to open the whole sole of the foot, which can start to stimulate from the root all the way up to the crown of the top of the body. So that works. Another thing that is wonderful is getting your feet massaged. Duh, right? So I am a huge fan of massage and touch for women, obviously consensual and invited, right? But in the postpartum period and during pregnancy as well. So massaging your own feet, though often this forward fold isn't really comfortable in those first few weeks postpartum. So recruit someone, lay down and have someone rub your feet. And some vigorousness can be quite helpful. Again, I don't have an assistant, so I'm not encouraging you to do this postpartum, but even just like slapping the bottom of the feet, this firm touch can be really good. You can also put on the floor. Please pray for my downstairs neighbors as I'm just smacking the floor right now. Right. And something else that can be really nice is scrubbing the feet, right? Anything that is stimulating of all of this skin on the bottom of the feet, including walking barefoot in general, something that can be so soothing depending on what season it is that you have your baby. Walking barefoot in the home can be nice on a variety of different textures. Rubbing your feet on the rug can all feel really good. Again, this is a little bit more once you're out and about. So hopefully we're looking at a few options that can stimulate while in bed, like a ball that's in bed, someone rubbing your feet, spreading the toes. And then once you're on your feet a little bit, maybe smacking the feet on the floor, or maybe if you can, going outside with your adorable baby and putting your feet on the earth. Any uneven surface is going to be quite stimulating and supportive. So activating the channels of the legs and feet, that's starting with the feet. From there, we'll move into our calves. So our calves and calf tightness is very associated with pelvic floor adhesion. We won't get into all the kind of fascial and anatomical or physiological underpinnings of why that is in this particular call, but instead focusing on solutions and things that can be supportive for the calves. So again, we'll look through a few different ways to do this, depending on where you are in your initial postpartum healing. So if you're at the very beginning, have someone help you do these things, right? Or pick ones that are more easily done reclined. So here I have a yoga strap, but you could also do this with a scarf. You could do this with a belt. You could do it with really whatever you have at home, right? But I'm sitting, right? I'm sitting with, I'll just actually bend this leg to the side so you can see more easily. I'm going to wrap this around, right? So it crosses over the front, crosses in the back. I'm just going to pull, right? Just kind of pulling. Oh, it feels amazing. Shimmy up and pull, shimmy up and pull. If any of you are doing this live right now with me, I'm just like, oh, hopefully you're finding this to be as lovely as I am, right? And I'm just shimmying it up the whole calf and really giving myself some counter pressure, right? That can be really lovely. And you can have someone do this for you as well. From here, just resting with the calves on something. So I have a yoga block here just because these are what I think more people have. But if you do happen to have a kettlebell at home, this works exceptionally well with a kettlebell, even works well with a dumbbell, anything that's firm. These are soft yoga blocks, but it would be better with one that's cork or a little firmer. But just here, resting my calf, right? You even try this once, you can see a little clearer, right? Oh, just even the weight of my calf or gently pressing down can feel like a lot. And then if I was resting on the horns, right on the sort of top of a kettlebell, if you have one, the weight of my calf down onto something firm is going to be giving some fascial relief to the calves. So this is definitely something you can do while laying in bed, right? So kettlebell might be a little firm on the bed. I guess it depends on what kind of bed you're working with, but anything like this would be really lovely. Also, if we want a softer vibe, just take a ball, right? And even just this, working, this is just like a kid's play ball or a little Pilates ball. Anything that's just sort of stimulating and getting these muscles in the back of the calves more awake is going to be long-term soothing, and you can work with the amount of pressure that feels supportive. So that's initial for the calves. That's using blanket ball. Okay, I'll do one more, and this one is definitely the most sensation rich and excellent to be saved for a little later in your postpartum healing, but we'll give it a go. So I have a rolled up blanket. Now this is for when you can comfortably be out of bed. And this is for a time when you can actually be seated, be seated out of bed. So I'm kneeling here. And I think kneeling in general is, while sitting is, we know, for in modern life, not actually the most functional, right? We know that sitting, when prolonged sitting has a myriad of sort of negative effects on the body, but it is quite important to be resting during this postpartum period. So when we are sitting, I often think kneeling can be a great choice. And kneeling, we'll get to this in a little bit, but kneeling on a ball, right? This is sort of skipping ahead to our other section, but this can be really lovely initial pelvic floor release, making sure if you have any vaginal tearing or stitches that healing is complete before you try this, but can be quite nice. But anyway, we'll take this blanket and I'm going to bring it all the way up. This one's actually a little big for me, all the way up into the pits of my knees. All right, all the way towards these knee pits. And then here's a little yoga block if I want. And woof, I can sit down on it. And this is just squishing into the backs of my calves. Now, for some of you, this might not seem like something that's available to you early postpartum, which I totally get. Sitting on the floor is not available to a lot of women and not even advantageous. This is a little later, right? When you're like, oh yeah, it sounds appealing to me, right? To move on to the ground, this can be an excellent choice. From there, oh, that already feels like a lot. I can move it down a little bit further on the calves and then even towards the Achilles. Usually you have to increase the size of the blanket roll the further you get from the knee and the closer to the ankle to still maintain that degree of, kind of counter pressure or support from the blanket. But everything that kind of activates these backs of the calves can be really supportive. Okay, let's do one more for opening the channels of the legs and feet before we move on. And this is just leg stimulation in general. So I'll come to stand here, right? The first one that I'll show is toe lifts. This is really simple. And you're gonna I'm gonna do 1 foot at a time. So right now my left toes are lifting and they're going back down. My left toes are lifting and they're going back down. What I would like us to envision is that, or just imagine, is that we have our kneecap that lifts as we squeeze the quadricep. But imagine we have a kneecap here, one here, one here, and one here. So sort of 4 kneecaps all the way up the front of the thigh. And as I lift the toes, they all lift up and all relax down. So this lifting and lowering is really great for stimulating the legs. So it feels amazing to me right now. I switch sides of lifting and lowering. If you can do it while spreading the toes, that's an amazing choice for your body, right? And you're just really working, kind of pumping this front of the legs. Activating the back of the legs is something we'll get to in our next section where we're soothing the hips and low back, which includes the whole back of the leg. So that is a really stimulating choice, right? And this can be done really simply. You get up to pee and you're 3 days postpartum, 3 days, you're a week postpartum, right? Because standing really for any period of time, for 3 days postpartum, might not be chill. Let's say a week or 2 weeks, right? You get up, you just take a minute, you just do a little some of this, and it can start to bring that stimulation back and feel really good. The other note here that I'll share is just standing in an effort to really align the knees with the feet. So I'm pushing into my feet and I'm imagining that my outer calves could roll backwards, right? Or another way to say that is like I could open a jar of peanut butter with my foot. So I'm like really kind of rolling those outer calves back. And you'll see I'm doing this exaggerated, but you'll see my knees right now, as I do that, they widen and line up over the foot. That's a great choice for our overall joint health in general, ankle, knee, hip. And it's something available to us in this early postpartum period. It also can start to turn on our glutes, which during pregnancy and postpartum can get super sleepy, and strong glutes is really important for long-term female pelvic health and integrity. Okay. One more that we'll work with for activating the legs is just shaking and tapping. So what this can look like is starting gently, just by actually tapping the foot on the ground and feeling a whole gentle reverberation. The key for this one is gentle, right? We talk about having that rebound feeling. So women often in their postpartum are like, oh, I struggle to jump on a trampoline, which is like, right, that's a lot of like, whoom, a lot of impact on the pelvic floor. But the way we start to really stimulate that is in very, very gentle ways of allowing there to be that reverberation all the way up through the legs. So I'm not suggesting hopping at all, but even just shifting on one leg. Imagine I had a chair or something here, and I'm just kind of tapping the foot gently on the ground and feeling it all wiggle, right? And doing both sides. Right. Another eventual thing would just be tapping. This is open palm. I'll speak up over the sound of my own tapping, right? But I'm all into these structures. Now, forward folding is not something I would generally recommend in this early postpartum period, unless it can be done with an extended tailbone, which requires some pelvic floor healing. So this is for women a little later, but I watch, I'm not tucking my tailbone, none of this ragdoll, but instead I'm bringing my butt back, I'm reaching my bum back. So I have this, and then I can do this through the whole leg, right? And what's important is I'm not doing this, I'm not sort of rounding my back and tucking my tailbone, ixnay, right? So if you can be in this shape with a soft belly and gentle tapping, this can go really nice scrubbing as well. So that's for the little bit later when you feel a little more confident on the feet. However, let's walk it back to when you're snuggled in bed in those first few weeks with your babe, right? You can have somebody do that for you. Feels great, right? And if your partner is like not good at massage, which I feel like many of us have that situation in our lives, this is a simple way, like you can't screw it up, right? And it feels good, and do it to the degree, the firmness that feels the most supportive for you. Right. The last one for activating the feet and legs that absolutely can be done while chilling in the bed is a simple point and flex of the feet. Point and flex of the feet, right? I probably should have began with this one, but here we are, right? So as I point and flex, I'm really activating the front and the back, right? I'm squeezing my kneecaps up, I'm ascending my heels forward. And this can be done throughout all the time that you're in bed. If you do it while flaring the toes, feels amazing, right? So that, we'll leave it there for stimulating the channels of the legs and feet. Foot stimulation, calf release, and leg stimulation. We looked at a few different ways to do all of those throughout those first weeks. Does anyone have any questions before we move into soothing the hips and low back? No? Okay, well, we'll keep right on trucking because there's so much that we want to get to. Okay, so soothing the hips and low back. Why I put these in the same category is I like to share that your hips and low back are best friends, right? They do everything together. And the idea that we're somehow thinking about our hips and low back as two separate structures is not based on anatomical reality. Everything is really interconnected in the whole body, but specifically if we're looking at these structures along the posterior chain. So we know that often laying in bed, and even just pregnancy and the postpartum period in general, can result in soreness in the hips and back. And a lot of that can be soothed and supported just through postural shifts. So we're going to look at a few different postural shifts in the whole pelvic region. So the first one that we'll look at is support. We'll look at in different ways to support the hips and low back is going to be the first step, because this happens from the moment you birth your baby. So you birth your baby and you walk from your bathroom over and into your bed and you're there, right? You take a big nap and then you wake up and it's like, okay, now I'm a mom again, right? This can be done from that moment forward. So all you need for this is a blankie, right? This is just a yoga blanket, but any blanket could work. I'd say the more ample in size, the better. And I'm coming to lay down, so just imagine this is a bed, right? I'm coming to lay down on my back, right? Maybe I have a pillow behind my head, right? And my baby is on my chest, my snuggly baby, right? Or maybe they're beside me. What I'm working with here is wanting to support this whole region, specifically without tucking the tailbone. So if you need a little refresher on that, go back to the very beginning of this webinar where we talked about that bony arrangement of the pelvis. Actually, just let me grab my pelvis, I'll show you again. So I know I'm kind of far away from camera now, but this is the female pelvic model. And what we're trying to avoid is this posterior, right? This is the upright tilt, but this posterior tilt. So when we're laying down, that difference would be laying down where my pelvis is still supported in this shape, or laying down where it's totally flattened and my tailbone is tucked up and under. I'll just show that again. Laying down in a way where my natural spinal curve is supported versus laying down in a way where I'm actually compressing the low back and compressing the pelvic floor and drawing that pubis, that tailbone towards the pubis. Is that feeling clear? I'll show this a little closer to the pelvis in a bit. So I'm here, I'm resting, and I'll take this blanket and I'll just begin to, well, the first thing I'll do is I'll have my hands on my hip bones. I'll just arch my low back away from the floor, just slightly, right? And this in itself might feel tiring or might feel like a lot. So go slow and do it to the degree that feels sustainable. So if it's just a teeny shift, great. Start with what feels good. And I really, really want to prioritize that. This is meant to be gentle and supportive and feel good. There's no like exercise or optimal alignment specifically in this early postpartum period. So grace is the name of the game, right? But in this gentle anterior, quote unquote, pelvic tilt, I'll take the blanket and I'm going to start to support all the way up along my waist, in alongside my hips, and then snuggle it up. Oh, this feels so good. Snuggle it up towards my pelvic floor. Yeah. So now I'm just chilling, but I'm supported in this shape. So I can fully let my muscles relax. But when they relax, I'm not going to tip into this posterior tuck tailbone shape because there's support underneath my SI joints, which again are these sacroiliac joints right in the back, right, where the sacrum attaches to the iliums. And so I can rest here. I can't share enough how much this would be helpful in that initial postpartum period, right? If women were resting in a way where their low backs were supported, as opposed to resting in a way where your low back is unsupported, where there's nothing actually helping you, how much that could ease low back discomfort. So that's a good one. The other one I'll show while laying down is belting the legs. I want you to be aware, you're gonna watch me put this belt on, and you, postpartum mama, are not gonna do it this way. You're gonna have someone help you. But in lieu of an assistant, I'm just gonna slide this around my thighs, right? And it is belted, meaning they can't move any further apart. And then I'm gonna release my legs long and keep supporting my pelvis. So why this can be helpful is it can allow my legs to relax without totally flopping open. And that can feel really good and supportive. And it can also, if you're healing a vaginal tear, specifically a vaginal tear without sutures, which is almost always going to be an easier healing process, it's important that we rest, not with our legs together, but not spread eagle necessarily, because having just some support, which not that one is supposed to rest that way anyway, but just having some support in that way can be really helpful. So belting the legs, they're not like a unileg or like a mermaid leg, but just so they're not fully flopping out.
like this. Oh my God. I, as someone who has some low back dysfunction or, low back stuff that I manage, I already find this to be really, truly supportive. Okay, so this is a great action for support initially in the low back. We're going to keep it moving. And then, well, just while I'm here, I'm going to show something. While this is not something I would recommend in those initial weeks postpartum, eventually from this action, this would be a little easier to do on the floor than on the bed, but it would still be possible on the bed, is just really kind of arching the back away from the floor or away from the surface you're laying on, removing anything under the head, so you wouldn't want any pillows here, and just pushing into the feet. Right? This doesn't look like much because there's not a lot to see here, but as I'm pushing into the feet, I'm beginning to activate my glutes, right? And this is a great way to start to wake up sleepy gluteal muscles. So this could be done, I would say, between weeks like 4 and 6. Right, so I'm here. You can do it with the belt or without. I'm just pushing into one heel, pushing into the other. I'm starting to get my glutes to fire and turn on without tucking the tailbone, which is why I still have this blanket support. Right, and then eventually I can push both heels at the same time. Don't hold the breath and release. Pushing both heels at the same time and release. This, as we move further into our postpartum healing, would lead into very low bridge pose hovering, where my hips are about a fist's width or height, I should say, off of the mat or the ground. It is not created by tucking the tailbone, instead by releasing the tailbone and really utilizing the glutes to support the weight of the pelvis. So that's maybe post 6 weeks. But even just starting here in these first 40 days or so, I mean, I'm saying 40 days and 6 weeks interchangeably, which are they? 6 times 7 is 42. Okay, yeah. Okay, so we're pretty much there, right? So here, just pushing into the heels. Oh, it actually feels really great for me. And then releasing. The next thing is moving and changing positions in this postpartum period is super important. Sorry if this is in the way. You're seeing all my props. And so how we're going to orient around this is shifting to our sides and never jackknifing or like, let me hold on to my feet. Don't do that, right? That's the thing of the past for your pelvic floor forevermore, right? But certainly now, and by now I mean pregnant or early or forever postpartum, but just don't do it in general, right? Instead, I will lift my chest like I'm opening my nipples. I'll push into my heels like we were just practicing, and then I'm going to shift onto my hip, right? And from there, I'll slowly paw my way up, right? And say I was on a bed, I would then swing my feet to the floor, right? And I would pause and come to seated in that trajectory, in that step-by-step fashion. Okay, let's move on to another way of supporting rest. So supporting rest was the first category in this hips and low back sequence. So we just looked at supporting rest while laying down. We're then going to look at supporting rest while seated. So let me grab a chair. So this is just an uncomfortable metal backless chair that no one would ever have in their home, but it happens to be what I have, so we'll use this. So imagine that this was maybe even just the side of the bed, right? So come all the way up to my side, and we're gonna look in a minute at moving from sit to stand functionally. But while I have nothing behind my back here, so it's a little hard to demonstrate, well, let me grab a bolster, that'll be easier to show. What often happens is once we feel comfortable sitting, which is often not in those first few weeks postpartum, but say, that 3, 4, 5 weeks when we're like, okay, I can sit in a chair and nurse my baby, right? There's a few different ways of sitting that could be either supportive for this female uprighted pelvic posture, or can be adding to this posteriorly tilted pelvic posture. So this nursing your baby, right? This is very popular, right? And we're going to try to support this a little more. So instead, just think butt back, right? Butt back and any support. And this is not shoulders back. And we're going to talk about that when we continue moving up the body. But really, we're just focusing here on the bum and your whole pelvic region.
And one way that this can look is a pillow. Sorry, I have this tiny little chair, but right, is a pillow behind your low back, right? And then maybe even, right, you can lean back, right? You might have something behind your head, right? Maybe you have cross cradle, right? If you're nursing your babe that way, maybe football hold, right? Sometimes this can be supportive. Arranging pillows is an art. It's individualized for every mom, right? So I'm not going to be like, do your pillows this way, because it has to do with your baby, your latch, the shape of your breast, so we're laterally set, anteriorly set, whatever's going on, which boob we're nursing on. So women who are good at arranging pillows, you have a magical talent that I want you to share with other women, which we'll not be talking about here. But pillow arranging in a way where you have that low back support is going to be super helpful, just like we were working with on the back. Okay? So this is maybe will be a little clearer. Again, I have a backless chair, which is stupid, but even just this, right? And if there'd be a back here, it wouldn't actually pooch out, right? And then I would have a little more support. This is not me tucking the tailbone and sitting with my nipples jutting forward. Instead, it's me allowing my low back to move in so I can come forward and nurse the baby this way, right? As opposed to the whole back curving in, upper back curving in, or upper back rounding, and your lower back moving into that more arched shape or curving towards the front. Does that feel clear? And so how this is supported will be unique to you and your baby and the chair you're sitting in and what's going on with you, right? But this is a generally supported shape. This is also true if you are seated on the floor, which again, floor seating might not be that helpful for in the early postpartum period, but if you are seated on the floor, I recommend kneeling rather than sitting cross-legged. We're gonna look at why right now. If you're kneeling, I like a ball. This ball is too small, right? This is a teeny ball. I wish it were twice the size. It's underinflated, meow, right? But yours would be bigger. And so you'd sit on it between your feet. Actually, those were really nice for my pelvic floor. If it were bigger, I'd be sitting up a little higher. Okay. From here, it's easier to actually allow the tailbone to move back, right? And I mean, you can still really slouch in this shape as well, but we're working to have that sort of low back support. And this also allows us to lean forward and nurse our babies. I think one real disservice to pregnant women is the concept that shoulders back equals good and healthy posture. That's ridiculous. Because what does that mean? Every mom that's ever caring for or nursing a baby is like inherently doomed? That is some bullshit that is based on misogynistic understanding of how the female body works. So yes, tilt your pelvis forward, but the low back can actually, the upper back can actually round. And this can be of service of our overall strength as long as it's not happening in tandem with the curvature and the tuck of the tailbone. This doesn't serve us, but this really can, right? Which is beautiful because this concept that somehow nursing our babies is bad for us, no, we can really release that. It's in the devil's in the details though. So how we do it is going to be really supportive. So this is a great way to sit on the floor with an uprighted pelvic posture. And just for visual sake, if I'm sitting cross-legged, it's just more tempting to round in the low back sitting cross-legged than it's to sit kneeling. However, and also it can be quite opening for your overall pelvic floor tissues, which doesn't often feel great postpartum. But if you are sitting this way, even later in pregnancy or just in general in your life, sitting up on some propping can allow for more support and that same integrated feeling or integrated musculature in the low back. Okay, hip and low back support. That was our first category in soothing the hips and low back. We're going to move forward, but that was the first one. Oh, I love this. Okay, moving from sit to stand. What a helpful thing that everyone needs to know how to do, especially how to do it in a way that is supportive. Let me clean up this little visual space for a minute. I'm just pushing things out of the way so it looks like such an empty studio. Okay, here's my chair. Maybe this is the edge of your bed. Some things that tend to happen when we move from sit to stand is this, or some like hang on, I gotta like, we do all these absurd things, which is because our muscles aren't recruited, which is fine in this initial postpartum period. But learning how to recruit the muscles is super helpful. So, one, I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, right? I'm gonna stand up out of the frame. Hang on, let me move this back a little bit so you'll be able to see me when I stand. Okay, so I'm here, right? First thing I will do is I will move the feet forward so they're under the knees or almost under the knees. Too far forward doesn't work, and too far in isn't going to give us the same muscular engagement. But you'll modulate how close the feet have to be based on how sort of strong you're feeling, I guess, at this point in your postpartum. But my feet are planted, right? I'm going to scoot all the way to the edge of my chair. And rather than leading with my chin, I'll draw my chin in and I'll lift up from the back of my head. I'll take a breath in. And on an exhale, reaching hands forward, or if you need to, initially pushing down on the thighs, I'll lean forward, push into the heels, and slowly come to stand. I know my head's cut off. Sorry about that. Okay. And then to come back down, I'm gonna bend my knees. I'm gonna reach my bum backwards. If I need to have my hands on my knees, that's fine. I'm gonna tap my butt down and come up to sit. This is very different from watch my chin. That. Although you can't see my chin when I stand up, so let's just go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to reach my butt back, right? But what's very different is this like right? Lifting the chin, right? And instead staying integrated in that whole front line, integrating my glutes. Maybe you swing your hands forward, or maybe you're actually holding the weight of your baby, which is quite likely, right? Now, this is not going to be available for us often in that early postpartum period. I'm talking first days and weeks, right? So guess what? People hopefully are there to help us get up and out of bed. That's awesome. Let's utilize them, but let's utilize them in a way that continues to turn on the musculature that's going to allow us to do these same sit to stand actions and stand to sit actions more functionally once that support is no longer available. So imagine, I think of something I would do often for women, or maybe other helpful would do is kind of hold under the armpits and like help you get up. That's great, right? We want that help, but rather than be like, oh, and like having them totally hoist you in these ways that are not functional, just have them carry most of your weight, but still you're pushing into your heels, you're taking a breath, you're going slow, you're knowing that nothing needs to be rushed because you just gave birth to a baby, so you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? Because you're magical superhero queen, right? So you're chilling, right? You're here. And then even if you have someone helping you, you still are chin in, use your glutes, come to stand. And even if someone's helping you, you're not doing one of these like, oh, right? And then that down the bed, like, no, that's gonna suck. It's gonna twist you. It's probably not gonna feel too great. Instead, if you're still in that, healing period, right? Someone's maybe helping you and you're like using them to support you as you come to sit. Feeling clear? Moving from sit to stand? Give some thumbs up. All right, love that. All right, now let's move into standing. I could teach a whole month workshop on standing. So we're gonna give you the 2-minute version. We're gonna let someone into the waiting room. Also, if you do have questions, be sure you're popping them in the chat. Okay. Standing while holding our babies, and in general for our female anatomy. The way I'm standing right now is quite common, right? And what you are seeing is that my hips are, I'll exaggerate, but my hips are now forward of my feet. Like I look like a ski jumper, right? Woo, right? And this often happens, especially when we're told to stand up straight, right? And we're told that shoving our pelvis forward and bringing our shoulders back is good posture. This is a lie, right? This is a lie that's based on male physiology, right? So instead, what we're going to work with is centering our pelvis over our feet, right? So often women then will just untuck their tailbone and stick their butt back. But what happens then is you're actually still not even moving in the pelvis. You're just hoisting your breasts and your forward and your ribs open. So there's still not a lot of spinal movement going on. It just kind of looks like there is. So instead, we'll focus on bringing our hands to our pubic bone and just pressing back. Where now you see my hips are over my feet. So I went from here, hips ahead of the feet, to here, hips over the feet. And often just doing that will bring that untucked posture into the pelvis. So I'll show you here on the pelvic model. So when we're forward, like when I was shifted forward, it's more in this shape. And just the act of pressing on the pubis and drifting back moves everything into this subtle, anterior tilt or supported female pelvic posture, which that in and of itself is allowing for these bones to support the bottom of the pelvic bowl, right? So why is this helpful? For a variety of reasons, because this is great supported posture for forever, but definitely in that early postpartum period when our pelvic floor and our whole inner pelvic musculature is feeling heavy, one temptation is to squeeze the glutes and tuck under so that our glutes can like take over for those pelvic floor muscles, right? We want something to kind of scoop under and hold everything up and in. But what that actually does is it takes this whole pelvic alignment and tilts it like this. So then rather than having support, you actually just created a slide. Whew, so all the pelvic organs can just continue to drop down. So this is one of the primary pelvic postures that's associated with a side joint pain, bladder incontinence, any degree of prolapse, is this shape where everything kind of slide out. And it's understandable why that happens because we're one, taught to stand like this, and two, we need support in this region. So the key is rest and don't do more than you can do. How can I put this? Let your pelvic support be the driving factor of your activity. So if you can't do an activity where you feel like you can have your pelvis over your feet and you're holding your baby doing that, then you're doing too much, right? And back it up until you actually get to that realm, right? So here, even just standing in this capacity, and so what that means, we were just practicing sit to stand. I'm coming up, imagine the chair was still there. I'm not coming up and shoving the pelvis forward, which is what many of us were taught, like a kettlebell swing or something, ixnay, right? We come up and I'm pressing into my feet and I use my low back and I center the pelvis. The last thing I'll share here is where this comes while we're holding the baby. So we're pretending, here, it's my pretend baby, my little blanket baby right here. I have a model baby over there, but we'll just use this for a moment. So I have my little baby. Right. What often happens is I sort of sling forward so I can rest my baby on my belly, on my ribs. Specifically, I'm talking to you second-time moms, maybe we're or third-time or eighth-time moms, maybe holding a kiddo on the baby belly while can you all picture this, right? The kid on the belly and you're holding, right? So you're shoving the whole thing forward to support the weight of the kiddo. We're going to break this habit and instead drift the pelvis back, right? And allow us to really hold our babies in front. This is also a great way, eventually, baby wearing has no expiration date, right? So learning to wear our babies at any point in this pelvic health and alignment is a great precursor, right? But wearing our babies on the front, right, can be really, really helpful because it's centering their weight. And it's reminding us, right, or we can let it remind us that we allow this to really, allow our babies to hang forward and we support them with our arms rather than tilting them back onto our chests, right? We really let that weight be there and support it with our arms and eventually our back muscles and our deep abdominals, our transverse abdominals. So this is really crucial, not shoving forward, but being here. Right? The last thing I'll talk about here in supporting the hips and pelvis, right, posture with the baby is going to be walking, right? And I'll just show you what a lot of people do is they walk squeezing their butt. They walk around like this. You maybe see people walk like this and they're like really doing stuff, right? That's, busy and also, quite intense for your hips and low back because you're squeezing your butt and you're moving your legs like little levers as opposed to articulating the pelvis while you move. So think of pelvic articulation being like this, where each side of the pelvis moves as you walk. So showing you with the pelvic model, it's something like this. It doesn't move quite right, but yeah, there we go. Right, where you're articulating the pelvis versus
If you were walking with his peg legs, you would be doing this as opposed to this, right? So walking slowly and letting your hips sway as you walk. So a way to practice this would be gentle hip figure eights. So think I lift and then I lift, right? And my heels are lifting as I'm doing this. I'm no Shakira, but you get the idea. Watch her music videos and be in awe, or anyone who does this better than me, right? Also go backwards, right? You'll probably find one direction a little easier, but this is great. It feels great. And you get up and you don't want to go anywhere, right? Because you have a teeny baby in the bed. You get up, you do this. You do 5 each direction. You take a deep breath. You shake out a leg. Maybe you tap it on the floor. Shake out a leg, you tap on the floor. You reach your arms up without shoving your breasts forward. We'll talk about that in a minute. You come down, you can feel like a new woman in 60 seconds on your way to pee, right? And just actually incorporating nutritious breath and movement can be so helpful. So hip circles and letting that move into a walk towards the camera, right? A gentle way that the pelvis can move as you walk, right? So my pelvis is articulating, it's shifting side to side, not like a ton, right? You do it walking backwards, maybe, yeah. So, right, I'm just kind of walking this way, and then I'm walking forward, which is different than squeezing my butt, tucking my tailbone, right? And that's going to be really helpful while you're wearing your baby. Even just the act of drawing your bum back a little bit and walking slowly can often be incredibly helpful when you're learning to do this. So that's the soothing of the hips and back. We talked about support, laying down and standing with the pillows and the kneeling and the ball. We talked about moving from sit to stand, both assisted and unassisted, as well as standing, both with or without your baby, right? And then walking, doing hip circles and the rest. And all that's going to be really helpful for that initial sort of soothing of the hips and low back. That's not like exercising, right? Quote unquote. And if you did ever want to kind of move into that a little bit, anything that activates the glutes. So something simple might be just like reaching your bum back, right? See, I'm like doing this on one side. So one knee is more bent than the other, kind of kickstanded. Okay. I'm just reaching my bum back. I'm just going back an inch, down an inch and up an inch, down an inch and up an inch, right? Just getting this glute to fire. This is great if you have any SI joint pain, right? But this one I would say is a little later, because being in this shape, leaning forward while holding a baby can be a lot of weight and just require a lot from like the breath and the shoulders and the abdomen. So if you are going to do this one, just make sure maybe your baby's like right there on the bed in front of you. Just do a little bit. Good switch. Other side. I'm just kickstanding my back leg. This knee bends a little bit. I reach the hip back and just up and down a few inches. What's going up and down is in this circumstance my right leg. So this one would eventually like lift, right? But not quite yet. So anything that's activating that back of the leg, back of the hamstring would be really helpful. There's 1,000 things we could talk about in this region, right? But we're going to keep it simple. And the rest of those I would really focus on really after the first 40 days, like hamstring engagement and further gluteal engagement. So stay tuned because that is coming, but not for today. Okay, any questions about soothing the hips or low back before we move into our last 2 categories of movement? Awesome. All right, onward we go. Let's talk about the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Let me come all the way up to you for this one. So again, I had my whole soapbox of like, let's not call it the pelvic floor, but I think what can be useful is the pelvic floor diaphragm. And I like this term even better because a diaphragm is something that is sort of buoyant and moves, right? And is this whole interwoven basket, right? And we often think of the floor as like the floor is stable, right? The diaphragm is mobile, which is why I like the term pelvic floor diaphragm more than pelvic floor. So, but our pelvic floor diaphragm is one diaphragm and our respiratory diaphragm is another diaphragm, which let's all just take a deep breath. Two more. One more. Beautiful, right? That's your diaphragm. Say hello to her. She does more than anything else in the body. She's like always crushing it. So your respiratory diaphragm is what we'll often just call the diaphragm, and many of us are more familiar with it than that of the pelvic anatomy. But our respiratory diaphragm and our pelvic floor diaphragm are in the same fascial sheath or fascial container, meaning they're in a sort of like a large, beautifully designed connective tissue container, right? And they're in the same container. So even though the musculature and the other connective tissue that is all woven into both the respiratory and the pelvic floor diaphragm are distinct, the container as a whole is related. I don't know. The image that was just coming to me was like the crankshaft of a car, which like maybe doesn't mean anything to you, but like, you know, whatever, like everything moves together. But maybe like a piston would be a better example, right? So everything moves up and down together. And please ignore my mechanical, for whatever reason, analogies that are coming to me. But so if we're thinking about our respiratory diaphragm, so this is our lungs and our pelvic floor diaphragm, they, in theory, right, when functional, will move together. So the respiratory diaphragm and pelvic floor diaphragm will move down together and they'll move up together. They'll move down together and they'll move up together. They move down on the inhale and up on the exhale. Down on the inhale and up on the exhale. We're going to talk about this for a minute because this is, if there was one thing I want you to take away from this workshop, let it be this. Breathing mechanics are going to have the greatest impact, I would say, potentially on our overall health, but definitely on our pelvic health and our postpartum healing more than anything else. Because if we're breathing functionally and in an optimal way for our physiology, then every breath we take is actively healing. Versus if we're breathing in a way that is opposing, say doing this as opposed to this, then every breath we take is actually disintegrating our overall pelvic health, right? So all these exercises are good and great, but if we're breathing in a way that is disintegrating, it's not going to be that supportive overall. So just like we'll pay attention to this. So this diaphragmatic breathing with our pelvic floor movement is a skill that can be learned. And what's quite brilliant is the body does this naturally, specifically when we are at rest. An example would be you watch someone sleeping. When they breathe in, you watch their ribs and their chest widen, right? And when they exhale, it falls, right? So every time you sleep, your body already does this, which means even if you're like, oh, I do the opposite, you can generally learn to correct it quite quickly because your body knows how to do it the optimal way. So what we're talking about when we inhale is the ribs, specifically the back ribs, because remember, our lungs are not here. 70% of our lung tissue is on our back body, right? So we need to inflate the back and the side ribs and then exhale, and that they get bigger and wider as we fill, which makes sense, right? Things get bigger as we inhale. We draw in, things get bigger, right? Well, that was kind of confusing language, but we inflate the lung balloons so everything gets bigger, and then we deflate the lung balloons so everything comes closer together. We're going to work with this in a moment. We'll walk through a practice, but just so the biomechanics are clear. So as everything gets bigger, right, we want our lungs to be able to move because remember, going back to that levator hiatus, going back to that sort of open chalice, like open kind of bottom of the pelvic floor in this initial postpartum healing period, we want to minimize pressure down, right? Because we're trying to have things move up, which is why it's open. The door is open for them to move up, which is optimal, but we don't want to be pushing them back down while they're trying to move up. But what happens if we don't actually move our lungs and open our ribs, then the pressure increases because we still fill the lungs, but the lungs fill and the diaphragm move down, which is going to put pressure down on the pelvic floor if we don't actually allow everything to move wide in the ribs, right? Which is going to keep that pelvic floor from not doing like all the way down because this moves all the way down, but instead everything moves out. So this just kind of softens down a little bit and then everything moves up together. So feel like everything's kind of moving out and down slightly. So the pelvic floor moves out and down slightly instead of pressure down with every inhale we take. Okay. That's feeling clear, right? The other thing that happens would be we inhale and suck in, which is definitely what we were taught to do. Or I will speak for myself. definitely what I was taught to do, which was suck my stomach in, which that directly creates a ton of pressure because I'm inhaling to fill the lungs and then also squeezing the balloon from the outside. So just imagine you're pumping up a balloon and then squeezing the balloon. It's going to increase the pressure inside the balloon. Is that image feeling clear? Right? You have a balloon in your fist and you're blowing it up. It's going to have more pressure because you're squeezing in on it. So that pressure has to go somewhere. And where that pressure goes is down. And we want everything to be supported, right? So that inhale, everything gets bigger as opposed to inhale, suck it in is super important, right? And just like exhale, right, where everything's getting smaller, if we are exhaling and sort of slopping and pushing everything out, right, then we're adding pressure there where it actually naturally would be relieving pressure because we're sort of letting everything fall and, collapse as we're exhaling. So we're going to look at the practice in just one more minute, but understanding this intellectually, I think is really helpful because it's logical if we think about it. Everything gets bigger as we inhale and therefore pressure isn't increased. Everything gets smaller as we exhale, therefore pressure isn't increased, right? And this whole concept is called pressure management and managing pressure within the canister, like the core canister, which I would say is like, upper lobes of the lungs and by your thyroid all the way down to your the actual pelvic floor, the bottom of your pelvic container, right? Managing pressure in that canister is going to be really helpful in general for breathing biomechanics and for our overall health and pelvic support. So we're going to look at a few ways to do this. I suggest starting doing this laying down in bed with your baby. So I'm going to set this up in a supported shape and we'll look at a breath practice. I go back to my pelvic support, right? So I'm laying down. I have pelvic support. I have something for my head. My head is supported. My low back and pelvis are supported. You can go back and watch the replay of our second section, hip and pelvic support, right? And I'm here and my knees are bent. This feels great to me, right? And this likely feels good to a lot of postpartum moms, right? You can knock the knees together if that feels good, or have them belted so they can rest out without flopping, right? Whichever feels appropriate. Now from here, I'm going to focus on inhaling in a way that rather than lifting my whole front ribs up, I'm inhaling in a way that presses my back ribs down. I also am feeling my ribs widen, and then I exhale and my front ribs come together. So this is the first breathing exercise. We're going to look at 3. But the first one is just inhaling to widen the ribs. And they're widening. My hands are around the sides of my ribs. My ribs are moving laterally, meaning east to west. And they're widening down. And then exhale, they're moving in. Okay. The key here is I'm not tucking my tailbone, right? I'm not doing this. Right? I'm in this adjusted neutral, this supported female pelvic shape. So I'm not like inhaling to draw my back down. I'm not drawing my back down by tucking my tailbone. It's all staying supported here. And so I can actually have something to work. I don't want to say work against, but I have a supportive frame upon which my ribs can really move, which is my pelvis in this supported shape. So that's the first thing. And you can do this right away with your baby in the bed, right? Anytime you're chilling in the bed, you can be working on diaphragmatic lateral breathing, and it's really soothing. It's down-regulating to your nervous system, right? It's decongesting to your whole vagal nerve trajectory because you're taking pressure off of your you're not shoving into the spine, which is actually putting pressure, activating all these, activating the, how can I put this? Your vagus nerve, which runs all the way from right around your thyroid all the way down to your cervix, right? If we have this kind of spacious container around the whole thing, it can be very down-regulating to your nervous system. So soothing and physiologically supportive. So that's the first action. The second action is as you exhale, right? This is maybe a few weeks later, you're just going to work on, and I suggest doing this through blowing out, like you're blowing out birthday candles. So
you're gonna do this, and as you do so, the frontal ribs start to come together. And I'll show you this close up in a minute. Maybe you can see my ribs. I inhale, they widen, and exhale, my frontal ribs come together, right? What this is not, and I'll be really clear, is belly breathing. This is not inhale, I push my belly up, exhale, I pull my belly down. Belly breathing is not the most integrated pelvic floor breathing. Rib movement, so our diaphragm is actually moving, is far more supported, right? So getting this inhale, everything widens, exhale, blow out birthday candles. So that's the initial. From there, eventually we'll start to add in some pelvic floor movement, right? So this pelvic floor movement, we're often familiar with Kegels, where we just like squeeze our vaginal muscles, right? And if you notice, we just do this Kegel right now, like what generally happens is you kind of squeeze your bum hole as well, and everything sort of tucks up and under, right? And often like undoing that, supportive pelvic shape when we're doing Kegels. So instead, I'm going to just walk you through this breathing exercise of an alternative to that. So you're laying here, right? You're with your baby, you're chilling, your pelvis is untucked. I want you to imagine that this part of your sacrum, right, kind of right above your coccyx, has a little weight down, right? So it's very grounded. This back of the back of your sacrum, but really kind of right in here, right? And hopefully you can see this. Can you see this? Just give me some thumbs up if you can. Cool. So kind of right in here, right above the coccyx is weighted, and that's going to stay weighted. And you imagine that there is a thread, and I have these here, although they're a little stretched out, but there's a thread moving from your coccyx to your pubic bone, and then from your sit bone to your sit bone. So there's two threads, one moving from coccyx to sit bone to pubis, and then moving from sit bone to sit bone. So if you're watching this recording, just picture this with me, right? So you're laying here, your tailbone's untucked, your SI joints are supported, right? And you're imagining these threads moving from the four corners of your pelvic bones. As you inhale, those threads gently become taut, meaning envisioning that your sit bones are widening and your tailbone is gently drawn down into the mat, so untucking. And so there becomes just a gentle tautness between those strings, both east to west and front to back. And then as you exhale, the bones stay in the same shape, right? The bones are the frame, but you imagine where those two threads cross, right? So if you just really go into the image here, you have the threads across east, like sit bone to sit bone, thread from front to back. Where they cross, which is going to be at your perineum, kind of right at the very back of the vaginal opening, where those cross threads are, as you exhale, they lift up and it makes this little pyramid shape, like a four-sided pyramid in the pelvic floor. So the inhale, the threads open, they come gently taut, and they exhale and this gentle pyramid forms. Again, like that, inhale, your ribs widen, everything like your sit bones widen. And then exhale, as the ribs come in, there's a channel that kind of lifts up, allowing that pelvic floor pyramid to ascend. This is very different because you're then a Kegel. Because what is happening, what you're envisioning happening, is the sides of the vaginal walls, right? Both like the front, the back, the right and left, and all the way up into the cervix. It's sort of like opening and that whole container is lifted. Like you're creating that pyramid. Versus with a Kegel, you're squeezing everything in, but you're kind of closing the vaginal walls, everything's coming together. As opposed to this, everything is staying spacious and lifting. So inhale, it goes down, and it's spacious and lifting. Now, if this feels confusing, it's because it is, or it can be. And so it just takes some practice. And then if you're in the initial stages of postpartum healing, you're like, what is going on down there? Like, I don't feel anything, which is totally fine. But even just having these images is incredibly powerful for relearning. And, if we can't imagine that it can happen, if we can't imagine that anything can happen, that's always the first step to it occurring, right? If we can't imagine, I don't know, whatever, having a successful business, then we're never gonna have a successful business. Like we have to know that it's possible. That was a terrible example, so please just let that one fall out of your brain. But my point being, imagining is the first step, right? So even just being able to picture these tissues moving like so is an incredibly supportive manner for initiating that movement. So I'll come a little closer. Notice I rolled to my side. That wasn't the most integrated, but I'm sliding on wood. Okay, we have 10 minutes left. We'll see what we can get through. I apologize. This might run slightly over 90 minutes, but so these threads are, right, and again, I know a little stretched out, so this is not the most integrated pelvic floor, but this front to back thread and also this side to side thread, and then where they are crossing, right, creates this ability for it to kind of lift up on the exhale and go become more taut on the inhale. Why that is important is eventually, right, that like inhale, widen, exhale, lift is very different than that like squeeze, Kegel, release, squeeze, Kegel, release, right? It's a buoyant, moving structure. I like the jellyfish image, right? Where they have this up and down sort of fluid movement, which is often the opposite of that like squeezing in Kegel movement, right? So just understanding this difference, and then it begins with respiration, is super helpful. So understanding, this is the sort of our third pillar, was understanding this respiratory pelvic floor diaphragm connection. The last thing I'll share, and I'll do this standing. Well, I'll show you here first actually, is breathing out with your tongue tucked behind your front teeth, breathing out through your mouth like that. So look like this. Shh. I can't even do it. Shh. Right? So it's like shh. I'm sort of doing it, trying to show you how I'm doing it with my mouth open, which is making me have an underbite, which is not the point. I feel like I can't do it without. This is a little better. But I can't show you if I'm doing it like that. But the idea is your tongue is behind your top teeth. So if I'm standing up and doing this, it will help with this whole front line engagement. So the pelvis is untucked. I inhale, widen my ribs, exhale. Everything feels supported. That naturally is going to engage my pelvic floor and my frontal and posterior muscles. So I was watching a really great video of a woman bouncing a baby like that. So this is maybe a little later, but just like as a way to keep everything moving and flowing while making a shushing sound for the baby, which was soothing for her individual baby. So that's another great sort of mouth postural breath technique. Okay. I'll also take this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about abdominals and abdominal healing in the postpartum period. Abdominals, we have this obsession with abdominals in our culture, which is dumb. But we have this idea that like abdominal strength is like the be all end all. But what we often define as abdominal strength is abdominal strength based on male physiology. So abdominal strength based on female physiology, in my humble opinion, is upper abdominal strength. So what we were just working on, so the ability for the ribs and like those frontal upper abdominals to move east and west, as well as gluteal, low back, right? QL and spinal erector strength. So our glutes, our piriformis, our low back muscles, all of those as being core or trunk canister muscles. And then our transverse abdominals, which I like to think of our transverse abdominals. I wish they were called our transverse spinals, though that wouldn't really make sense, but thinking of them as a spinal muscle because they are on the front of the spine. Does that make sense? So our spine, right, your nose is over here. These are muscles that support the anterior spine rather than like the abdominals pulling back, right? So if we think of our transverse abdominals as spinal muscles, those are incredibly helpful for our like sort of female overall abdominal engagement. And so it's not sucking in your low belly. It's not the horrible cue of like, can you zip up from your pubic bone to your belly button? Can you zip into a pair of skinny jeans? Like that kind of stuff, which I think is generally harmful in general, but certainly for that initial postpartum healing period. So as we're talking about like ab rehab, which is a question that I got leading up to this webinar, ab rehab in general for women, but certainly here is
Can we stand without tucking our tailbone? Can we get our diaphragm to move? As we exhale, can we get those upper abdominals to draw and knit together and our back ribs to drop down, right? And can we start to have this inhale, my ribs widen, exhale, my low belly and womb pull back as I breathe out, not because I'm sucking in, but because the diaphragm is gently moving back, which is like picking things up, right? And you have this sort of action that's happening with your spinal muscles, your pelvic floor, and your respiratory diaphragm, right? So that is when we're talking about abdominal engagement for women in general, but certainly in this postpartum healing period. And it's not crunches, it's not planks, many of which are actually increasing our intra-abdominal pressure, right? Going back to what we were just talking about, which can often be directly contraindicated and even harmful for female bodies. So that's a whole other webinar, but we just want to present that here. Okay, we have 5 minutes, which we are not going to get through this in 5 minutes. So I apologize. This is going to go for another 15 minutes. That will run 10 minutes over, but I really want to get to this last component, which is soothing the neck, shoulders, upper back. So we'll start with continuing on this theme of widening the ribs. So action to work with as we're widening the ribs in service of, let me take this off of it, we'll see it a little easier. In service of soothing our postpartum body is not sort of drawing our shoulder blades together, which is compressing the ribs in the back or doing this kind of cat-cow action. Instead, we're going to widen our collarbones and our shoulder blades. So a simple way to do that is palm into fist or fist into palm. And you'll see as I do this, I am widening the back of my chest without tucking my tailbone. So my pelvis is stacked. I'm not really leaning forward, but feel free to kind of slouch, like let the shoulders come forward as long as you're not tucking under with the buttocks, right? And what's happening here, I'm really pressing and I'm feeling my shoulder blades move wide and my collarbones move wide. It feels amazing to me, right? And as I'm here, I'm really framing open and I'm keeping the ribs open, and then I inhale and I'm pulling wide into these ribs. Like I feel this all moving because I'm holding it open. And then I exhale and everything drops down. Inhale. I'm widening my back ribs, and then exhale. Everything drops down. It's easiest to practice with standing. We'll try one more. And everything drops down. The progression for this is the palm side. So I have palm into fist, or now I have left palm into fist, is I will very subtly twist to my right if my left palm is up. So I'm just pushing, pushing, pushing. So I have a very subtle twist. You can see how much it is. If this is the middle, I'm going about here, right? And then I do it again, meaning I breathe again. I'm widening now more into my left lung. And then I come back to center. Switch sides. I take a few breaths here. And then when I'm ready, I keep my hips stable and I push over into my left, towards the left with my right palm, and I'm widening into my right lung. If you'd like, you can also do that exercise with a ball between your upper inner thighs, which can help you stay firm and stable as you're twisting. This is an excellent anecdote for all of this mid-back pain that is so common with nursing, right? Because often we're doing this all the time, and these muscles are actually quite weak, right? Which is fine, right? But this is a way we're going to teach them to really support and support us and pull apart, which is going to be really helpful. So adding to our little I stand up to pee routine, we do a little few Shakira circles, right? This like, right? We do a little tapping, right? We, right? Do a little diaphragmatic breathing, a little twist. Oh, my whole body feels amazing, right? And I just stood up for, 2 minutes. So that's the first one we're really looking at for this diaphragmatic, or for this kind of upper back comfort. From there, we'll move into an arms overhead shape. So I'm reaching my arms up, right? So you can see me if I step back a little bit. I'm turning my palms towards each other. And what I'm shifting is I am not hoisting my nipples up and back bending. Look, this creates that whole like kind of ski jumper or like front of the ship, lady who's like, you know what I mean? We're gonna keep that pelvis moving back. I'm gonna turn my palms towards each other.
Move them forward slightly with the shoulders, and then imagine my thumbs could lift higher than my pinkies. So I'm lifting my back ribs up. So rather than my nipples moving forward, the back of my pelvis or the back of my ribs reach up. And then maybe I just like climb a little bit. Like I had a rope and I could reach and kind of pull, reach and pull, reach and pull, reach and pull. This is obviously going to mean you're going to feel this all the way down into the pelvic bowl. So you will know right away if really actively reaching your arms overhead, if that's tugging and feeling uncomfortable on your vaginal muscles. Not yet, right? This is something that is likely going to feel good. I mean, I see some moms have this feel really good as early as a week postpartum. Other moms, it might take a longer amount of time, right? I would say all of this, by the way, is also quite useful, even if you're recovering from a cesarean section. These actions, however, is reaching up. I want that to be very gentle and maybe wait a little longer because it can put a lot of pressure on that incision or on that like sort of healing structure. But the last thing here, you're reaching up. Maybe you start to alternate lifting off the heels. So I'm kind of reaching from my right heel all the way up through my left heels lifting and reaching through my left vaginal wall, kind of up along my right nipple line to my right hand. So this deep diagonal line, and then I switch. Right? And this can just feel really, really nice for that whole upper back region. Feeling clear? Awesome. Moving back down to the mat, this is one that can be done. I just made a reel about this, so you can check that too. I have my handy dryer ball. We're going to be using this dryer ball all throughout this outer armpit region. So if we tend to find like where our breast tissue is, and then move from there all the way up, we're on the inside of the shoulder blade, which is back here, right? But not all the way towards the ribs, which are down here. So I will come to lay down on my side, and I'll nestle this ball, it's very tender, into this region. And you'll kind of wiggle around until you find something that feels quite sensation rich. Maybe you're supporting right behind the ear, or maybe you rest all the way down. And you'll hold this for about 2 to 5 minutes per location. So say, fast forward, I'm here for 2 minutes. I'll adjust, and maybe I move like a half an inch, and I'm like, oh God, how is it so bad, right? How is this so sensation rich? And I'll stay here for 2 minutes or more. Right? Why this is great is it's freeing up all of the fascia, all of our connective tissue that's in this whole side rib armpit region, which of course is directly indicated into our breastfeeding and our mammary glands and all the rest. And we know, or if you don't, when we're working towards hand expression or releasing breast milk, we start like way up here and move towards the nipple, right? We're not just like squeezing the breast, but we're working all the way through this armpit region. So getting this to be mobilized, which having a release in fascial adhesion mobilizes that tissue. It brings more blood flow, it brings more lymphatic flow, and more breast milk flow. So congestion in that area, in my humble opinion, is one underlying contributing factor, or that can contribute to mastitis. Just not mastitis, just general soreness and this like, oh God, everything hurts as you're in those, 12-hour breastfeeding days that are so common, right? That they're so, that I should say that just are the reality of that initial postpartum period. So this is a great one to do in the bed. If you're doing it in the bed, use a harder ball because the bed will take some of the give, right? You can also use a yoga block, right? Kind of laying on the yoga block. You could also just use a rolled up towel, kind of depending on how sore or tender you are, and excellent to be done while you are sideline nursing your baby, right? So that's a great one. And I think I have one more. Yes, okay, let's talk about, I have 2 more. Let's talk about the neck. So neck extensions are incredibly useful for unweighting, is that the right word? Taking weight off of our pelvic floor. And what I mean by that is when we're standing or even just sitting, having the head weighted forward is just putting a lot of pressure all the way down this fascial line versus having the head all the way uprighted. So one way to practice this is neck extensions. I can't speak while I do this, so I will walk you through it verbally and then I'll show you visually. So I'm here, I'm going to be drawing my chin back. I'm going to be opening the jaw, scooping the flesh of the neck forward with my fingers and letting my head rock all the way back. It'll look like this. To come out and hinged forward from the hips, drop the chin down and lift up. That was a very brief hold, but what I suggest is rocking the head back and then opening and closing the jaw to be able to modulate the depth of the neck extension that happens through the jaw mobility, right? So to show what that looks like, I'm scooping the flesh forward. Maybe you leave the fingers there, maybe you don't. And I was just moving the jaw around to kind of see how far the head would drop back. The key with neck extensions is duration. So I work up towards, I can't quite do this yet, but an 8-minute hold is a long time for a neck extension, but that's something that I find has been incredibly helpful for healing a lot of different sort of neck and upper back stuff. But let's start with 20 seconds, right? And be working up. I would say many people get a ton of benefit even from that. And the interest of where we want these muscles to be moving in is right here between the shoulder blades and all the way up into the back of the neck. Those muscles are moving in. Just a reminder here, as now that we're getting to the neck, what we're doing with all these exercises is asserting our spinal curves. So the low back moves in, the thoracic spine moves out, and the cervical spine moves in. Lumbar in, thoracic out, cervical in, which so much of what we're taught is low back out, don't tuck your tailbone, shoulders back, right? And then lift your chin, which is the opposite of our natural spinal curves. That's literally reversing all of our spinal curves, which is a recipe for just discomfort throughout the whole body. So that's the other Cliff Notes version. If you're like, is this okay for me? Well, what's it doing to your spinal curves? Is it helping them be in their natural alignment? The last one we'll say here is face and releasing the face. Many of us have also heard about the connection between our jaw and our pelvic floor, tension in our jaw, often related to tension in our hips. There's a whole underlying connective tissue component to that. But anything that is softening to the muscles and the structures of the face is going to be useful. So that could look like just actually sticking the tongue out. And when I mean that, like people are like, oh, I stick my tongue out, right? No, I mean like stretching your tongue out all the way from the back of your mouth until you're like salivating and it feels like it's like stretching, right? That's going to be really useful. Or puffing up your puffer cheeks, right? And holding it, obviously, I'm not doing this for duration, right? But holding it for 2 minutes in one cheek and hear the snap, crackle, pop, open the muscles of the cheeks on either side, right? Even things as simple as moving the eye gaze all the way to the left and holding it. And then moving eye gaze all the way to the right and holding it, right? Actually moving around. I like to do one where I would turn my head to the right, move to the left, turn my head to the left, move my eyes to the right, and my jaw to the right, turn my head to the left, to the right. I'll say that again because it's confusing. As the head turns the direction. So it'll look something like this. Right. It's hard for me to do in reverse on Zoom while I'm talking to you, but you get the point. And that can be really nice to do while laying down, like head on your bed, just gently turning the head right and left, gliding the jaw right and left, moving the eyes right and left, and coming up with patterns where everything is moving together. It's neurologically stimulating, down-regulating for your body in general, and can be really supportive for getting all the internal muscles of the head and skull to be mobilized, which even just in our iPhone culture, our screen culture, or that can be useful for anyone. So the last thing I'll say for the face, massage the face. I love the gua sha tools, anything that is just sort of smoothing, anything that feels really good. Having someone do it for you is such a lovely, tender practice. But also obviously just doing it for yourself can be really nice.
And having your baby see you and your other kids take care of yourself in this way is a really lovely, nurturing practice as well. So that sums it up. Let me just see this question. For female bodies, when practicing yoga movements and postures, do you recommend refraining from tucking your tailbone in all yoga postures? Yep, I do. Whitney, that's your question. I'm not down with tucking the tailbone. To be clear, tucking the tailbone is an action, just like any other, that is fine. There's no actions that are inherently wrong. However, the vast majority of women are already in a tucked tailbone posture, right? We're already struggling to have spaciousness in our pelvic floor, have an anterior pelvic tilt. We've been told to like set, like, firm the whole low belly in, which is going to do this anyway, and tuck the tailbone. And and those postures and those alignment cues were definitely created and passed down along male body lines. And when do you recommend to start doing Kegels was another question. And so I recommend that you sort of go back to our breath work section, which was the third of 4 sections. I would say it started around probably like 75 minutes in, maybe 70 minutes into this recording, where we talk about an alternative to Kegels, right? Of getting the pelvic floor to mobilize in a more holistic and integrated way. So I would really focus on that being clearer rather than doing a Kegel, and having that engagement and that spaciousness be very clear in the body is, in my opinion, the precursor to practicing any Kegel-like action, which Kegels aren't bad, just like tucking your tailbone isn't bad. No action is inherently wrong, but it's being clear, what is the point? Why are you practicing this action? And what is it that you hope to accomplish? If you are doing it and you don't know the answer to that, that's a good reason to reconsider or to seek out someone who would know the answer. And if you are talking to a movement practitioner, a yoga teacher, a physical therapist, and they can't tell you the true function of the action or what it is hoping to engender, then that's a sign that you may want to, speak with someone who might know a little bit more about the actions that you're practicing in your postpartum body. So I hope that gets to all of your questions. I know I got a bunch on Instagram and I tried to work them into our talk today, but if anyone does have any other questions, now is a great moment to voice them. And if not, we'll leave it here. These knowing your pelvic anatomy, untucking your tailbone, and respecting your levator hiatus were our first points. And then going through those 4 categories of movement, activating the channels of the feet and legs, soothing the hips and low back, strengthening your diaphragm, pelvic floor, respiratory diaphragm, pelvic floor diaphragm connection, and activating the muscles of the rib basket, the upper back, the neck, and the face. All of those will be really soothing for your whole postpartum journey, but definitely in those early weeks. So I hope this is helpful to you. And if you do have any questions, be sure you follow me on Instagram at Small Magic Birth. You can reach out to me. I'm responsive in my DMs, so that's a great way. You can also check out my website, smallmagicbirth.com. And if you are in the New England region, I attend births all throughout the region and have a well woman care practice where I see people here for all different kinds of pelvic support and other women's health concerns. So those are all the ways you can be in touch. And if you found this useful, please send this on to other mamas. The more that we can all support each other, the more support we have. So thanks so much. And I'll talk to you all soon.